The Birmingham pub bombings, also known as the Birmingham bombings, were a series of bombings which occurred in public houses in Birmingham, England on 21 November, 1974. The explosions killed 21 people and injured 182 others. Although the Provisional Irish Republican Army have never officially admitted responsibility for the Birmingham pub bombings, a former senior officer of the organization confessed to their involvement in 2014, with an admission the Birmingham pub bombings went against everything we, the Provisional Irish Republican Army, claimed to stand for. 6 Irishmen were arrested within hours of the blasts, and in 1975 sentenced to life imprisonment for the bombings. The men, who became known as the Birmingham Six, consistently maintained their innocence and insisted police had coerced him into signing false confessions through severe physical and psychological abuse. The convictions of the Birmingham Six were declared unsafe and unsatisfactory, and quashed by the Court of Appeal in 1991. The Birmingham pub bombings are seen as both one of the deadliest acts of the Troubles and the deadliest act of terrorism to occur in Great Britain, between World War II and the 2005 London bombings. Moreover, the convictions of the Birmingham Six are seen as one of the worst miscarriages of justice in British legal history. Background: in 1973, the IRA extended its campaign to mainland Britain, attacking military and symbolically important targets to both increase pressure on the British government, via popular British opinion, to concede to their demand to withdraw from Northern Ireland, and to maintain morale amongst their supporters. By 1974, mainland Britain saw an average of one attack, successful or otherwise, every 3 days. These attacks included 5 explosions which had occurred in Birmingham on 14 July, one of which had occurred at the Rotunda. Prior to any attack upon civilian targets, a code of conduct was followed in which the attacker or attackers would send an anonymous telephone warning to police, with the caller reciting a confidential code word known only to the IRA and to police, to indicate the authenticity of the threat. On 14 November, James Patrick McDade, a 28-year-old UK-based member of the Provisional Irish Republican Army, was killed in a premature explosion as he attempted to plant a bomb at a telephone exchange and postal sorting office in the city of Coventry. A second man, Raymond McLaughlin, was arrested near the scene of the explosion. He was charged with unlawfully killing McDade and causing an explosion. In response to the death of McDade, the Republican movement in England had initially planned to bury McDade in Birmingham, with the funeral procession conducted with full paramilitary honours. However, these plans were altered in response to the British Home Secretary's insistence this proposed funeral, and any associated sympathy marches, would be prevented. Likewise, various councils within the West Midlands chose to ban any processions connected to the death of McDade under the Public Order Act 1936. James McDade's body was driven to Birmingham Airport and flown to Ireland on the afternoon of 21 November 1974. Initially, his body had been scheduled to be flown to Belfast Airport. However, upon learning that staff at the airport had refused to handle the coffin, McDade's body was instead flown to Dublin. All police leave was cancelled on this date, with an extra 1,300 officers drafted into Birmingham to quell any unrest as the hearse carrying McDade's coffin was driven to the airport. According to a senior figure within the Provisional Irish Republican Army, tensions within the local IRA unit were running high over the disrupted funeral arrangements for James McDade. The bombings. In the early evening hours of 21 November, a minimum of 3 bombs connected to timing devices were planted inside 2 separate public houses and outside a bank located in and around central Birmingham. It is unknown precisely when these bombs were planted, although if official IRA protocol of preceding attacks upon non-military installations with a 30-minute advance warning to security services was followed, and subsequent eyewitness accounts are accurate. The bombs would have been planted at these locations sometime after 1930 and shortly before 1947 in the evening. According to testimony delivered at the 1975 trial of the 6 men wrongly convicted of the Birmingham pub bombings, the bomb planted inside the mulberry bush was concealed inside either a duffel bag or briefcase, whereas the bomb planted inside the tavern in the town was concealed inside a briefcase or duffel bag and Christmas cracker boxes. The remnants of 2 alarm clocks recovered from the site of each explosion leaves the possibility that 2 bombs had been planted at each public house. Although the actual explosion crater at each location indicates that if 2 bombs had been planted at each public house, they would each have been placed in the same location and likely the same container. Reportedly, the individual who planted these bombs then walked to a pre-selected phone box to telephone the advance warning to security services. However, the phone box had been vandalized, forcing the caller to find an alternate phone box and in so doing, significantly reducing the amount of time police had to clear the locations. In 2011, an unknown man with a distinct Irish accent telephoned the Birmingham Post newspaper. The call was answered by an operator named Ian Cropper. To Cropper, this individual stated the words, "There is a bomb planted in the rotunda and there is a bomb in New Street at the tax office. This is XX," before terminating the call. A similar warning was also sent to the Birmingham Evening Mail newspaper, with the anonymous caller again giving the official IRA code word to indicate the authenticity of these threats, but again failing to specifically name the actual public houses in which the bombs had been planted. Mulberry Bush. The Rotunda was a 25-story office block that housed the Mulberry Bush pub on its lower 2 floors. Within minutes of the anonymous phone threat, the police had arrived at this location and had barely begun to check the upper floors of the building for explosive devices, but had not had sufficient time to clear the crowded pub located street level. At 2017, just 6 minutes after the first telephone warning had been delivered to the Birmingham Post, the bomb, which had been concealed inside either a duffel bag or briefcase located close to the rear entrance to the premises, exploded, devastating the pub. The explosion blew a crater measuring 40 inches in diameter in the concrete floor of the premises, causing a section of the roof to collapse and trapping many casualties beneath girders and concrete blocks. Numerous buildings near the rotunda were also damaged and passers-by in the street were struck by flying glass from shattered windows. Several of the fatalities were killed outright, including 2 youths who had been walking past the premises at the moment of the explosion. 10 people were killed in this explosion, with dozens injured, including many who would lose 1 or more limbs. Several casualties had been impaled by sections of wooden furniture, with others having their clothes burned from their bodies. A paramedic called to the scene of this explosion would later describe the carnage as being reminiscent of a slaughterhouse, whereas one fireman would state that, upon seeing a writhing, screaming torso, he had begged police to allow a television crew inside the premises to film the dead and dying at the scene, in the hope the IRA would see the consequences of their actions. However, the police refused this request, fearing the reprisals would be extreme. One of those injured was a 21-year-old woman named Maureen Carlin, who had received such extensive shrapnel wounds to her stomach and bowels she would later recollect informing her fiancé, Ian Lord, "If I die, just remember I love you." Carlin was given the last rites, with surgeons initially doubtful she would live, although she would recover from her injuries. Tavern in the Town. Patrons at the Tavern in the Town, a basement pub on New Street located just 50 yards from the rotunda and directly beneath the New Street tax office, had heard the explosion at the Mulberry Bush, but had not associated the sound as sourcing from explosives. Police had begun attempting to clear the Tavern in the Town when, at 2027, a second bomb exploded at these premises. The explosion was so powerful that several victims were blown through a brick wall. Their remains were wedged between the rubble and live underground electric cables that supplied the city center. One of the first police officers to arrive on the scene, Brian Yates, would later testify that the scene which greeted his eyes was absolutely dreadful, with several of the dead stacked upon one another, other fatalities strewn about the ruined pub, and several screaming survivors staggering aimlessly amongst the debris, rubble, and severed limbs. According to one of these survivors, the sound of the explosion was replaced by a deafening silence intermingled with the smell of burnt flesh. Rescue efforts at the tavern in the town were initially hampered as the bomb had been placed at the base of a set of stairs descending from the street which had been destroyed in the explosion, and the premises had been accessible solely via this entrance. The victims, whose bodies had been blown through a brick wall and wedged between the rubble and underground electric cables, would take up to 3 hours to recover, as recovery operations would be delayed until the power could be isolated. A passing West Midlands bus was also destroyed in the blast. This bomb killed a further 9 people and injured every person present in the pub, many severely. One of those injured in this explosion, a 28-year-old barman named Thomas Chater, would succumb to his injuries on the 28th of November. Another individual, 34-year-old James Craig, would also succumb to his injuries on the 10th of December. After the second explosion, police evacuated all public houses and business premises within Birmingham city centre and commandeered all available rooms in the nearby city centre hotel as an impromptu first aid post. Prior to the arrival of ambulances, rescue workers removed critically injured casualties from each scene upon makeshift stretchers constructed from devices such as tabletops and wooden planks. These severely injured casualties would be placed on the pavement and given first response treatment prior to the arrival of paramedics. Hagley Road at 21:15. A third bomb, concealed inside 2 plastic bags, was found in the doorway of the Barclays Bank on Hagley Road, approximately 2 miles from the site of the first 2 explosions. This device consisted of 13.5 pounds of frangette connected to a timer, and was intended to detonate at 2300. The detonator to this device did activate when a policeman prodded the bags with his truncheon, but the bomb failed to explode. This bomb was destroyed in a controlled explosion early the following morning. Fatalities altogether, 21 people were killed and 182 people were injured in the Birmingham pub bombings, making these attacks the worst terrorist atrocity to occur in mainland Britain throughout the Troubles, and the bombings colloquially referred to by residents of Birmingham as being the darkest day in their city's history. Many of those wounded were left permanently disabled, including one young man who lost both legs, and a young woman who was rendered blind by shrapnel embedded in her eyes. The majority of the dead and wounded were young people between the ages of 17 and 30, including a young couple on their first date, and 2 brothers of Irish descent, Desmond and Eugene Riley. The wife of Desmond Riley would subsequently give birth to his first child 4 months after his death. One of the victims killed in the second explosion, 18-year-old Maxine Hambleton, had only entered the tavern in the town to hand out tickets to friends for her housewarming party. She was killed seconds after entering the pub and had been standing directly beside the bomb when it exploded, killing her instantly. Her friend, 17-year-old Jane Davis, was the youngest victim of the bombings and had herself simply entered the tavern in the town to view holiday photographs she had developed that afternoon. Mulberry Bush, 8:17 p.m. Michael Beasley, Stanley Bodman, James Caddick, Paul Davies, Charles Gray, John Jones, Neil Marsh, Pamela Palmer, John Rowlands, Trevor Thrupp. Tavern in the town, 8:27 p.m. Ling Bennett, Thomas Chater, James Craig, Jane Davis, Maxine Hambleton, Anne Hayes, Marilyn Nash, Desmond Riley, Eugene Riley, Maureen Roberts, Stephen Worley. Initial reaction. The Birmingham pub bombings stoked considerable anti-Irish sentiment in Birmingham, where the 100,000 members of the Irish community were ostracized from public areas and subject to physical assaults, verbal abuse and death threats. Both in Birmingham and across England, Irish homes, pubs, businesses and community centres were desecrated and attacked, in some cases with firebombs. Staff at 30 factories across the Midlands went on strike in protest at the bombings, while workers at airports across England refused to handle flights bound for Ireland. Bridget Riley, the mother of the two Irish brothers killed in the tavern in the town explosion, was herself refused service in local shops due to her Irish heritage, prior to either branch of the IRA issuing a statement confirming or denying their culpability in the atrocities. The responsibility for the attacks was placed upon the Provisional IRA, because of the anger directed against Irish people in Birmingham after the bombings. The IRA's Army Council placed the city, strictly off-limits, to IRA active service units. In Northern Ireland, loyalist paramilitaries committed several revenge attacks on Irish Catholics. Within 2 days of the Birmingham pub bombings, 5 Catholic civilians had been shot to death by loyalists. First IRA statement 2 days after the Birmingham pub bombings. The Provisional IRA issued a formal statement in which they flatly denied any responsibility for the bombings, although the statement did stress that a detailed internal investigation was underway to determine the possibility of any rogue members' involvement in the bombings. The Provisional IRA emphasized that the methodology of the attacks contradicted the official IRA code of conduct when attacking non-military targets, whereby adequate warnings would be sent to security services to ensure the safety of civilians. The Provisional IRA have never officially admitted responsibility for the Birmingham pub bombings. Prevention of Terrorism Act of 1974. Within 4 days of the Birmingham pub bombings, Roy Jenkins, then Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, formally announced that the Irish Republican Army was to be proscribed within the United Kingdom. 2 days later, on the 27th of November, Jenkins signed into effect the Prevention of Terrorism Act of 1974, an act which granted police the right to arrest, detain, and question individuals for a period of up to 7 days if they were suspected of the commission or preparation of an act of terrorism within the British mainland, and their subsequent deportation to either Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland if culpability was proven. Jenkins is known to have described the measures of this act as being draconian measures unprecedented in peacetime. In response to public pressure, a separate debate within the House of Commons as to whether those convicted of terrorist offences should face the death penalty was held on 11 December 1974. This motion drew the support of more than 200 MPs, although the majority of those in Parliament voted against the restoration of the death penalty, in part due to fear that such a move could have encouraged the IRA to use children to plant bombs. The Prevention of Terrorism Act of 1974 became law on the 29th of November, and would remain in force within the United Kingdom until the passage of the Terrorism Act in July 2000. Forensic analysis and analysis of the recovered remnants of the bombs placed at the Mulberry Bush and the tavern in the town revealed these devices had been constructed in a similar manner to the bomb placed at Hagley Road. Each bomb placed inside the public houses would have weighed between 25 and 30 pounds, and had contained numerous shards of metal. Furthermore, this forensic analyst was also able to state that the construction of these devices was very similar to that of 7 other bombs and incendiary devices discovered at various locations in Birmingham, Coventry and Wolverhampton in the 16 days prior to the Birmingham pub bombings, and that the explosive material used to construct the bomb discovered at Hagley Road was of a brand solely manufactured in the Irish Republic, which could not legally be imported into Britain. All these factors led the explosives experts to conclude that all three bombs had been manufactured by the same individual or individuals, and that it was likely that whoever had constructed these bombs had also committed previous IRA attacks. This conclusion was further supported by the actual methodology of the attacks, and the official IRA code word given to the Birmingham Evening Mail and Birmingham Post newspapers minutes prior to the explosions.